Right, hello and welcome to MGC Plumbing Training. Today I'm going to be talking about Phase 1 of the new City and Guilds 918903 Diploma in Plumbing and Domestic Heating Apprenticeship Scheme. Okay, so I'm just going to give you an introduction to what the course is over, but I am going to be mainly focusing on what Phase 1, what is required in Phase 1 if you are a teacher or a student who is taking on this course. Right, so the new 9189 from City and Guilds, it is basically the new way of doing your apprenticeships. Instead of being a 2-year course for level 2 and a 2-year course for level 3, it's now put into one course and it is known as a level 3 qualification. It is over 4 years for your initial course and then a further maybe 6 months for your endpoint assessment, just depending on how quickly you can get that endpoint assessment in. But it is broken into 4 phases. Phase 1 to 3 covers our core content, so everything there is to know about plumbing. So what we used to cover at level 2 and level 3 is all squished in, so instead of having the 4 years, we now have 3 years to cover the core content. But there is set content that we have to cover for each one of them phases. You can't just go and blast it and say, right, I'll do level 2 at phase 1 and then I'll do level 3 over 2 and 3. You've got to follow the City and Guilds content, and I'll explain why as we're going through. Phase 4 is your final pathway. So for the college that I'm working at the moment, their end level 4 or phase 4 is for gas. Okay, natural gas. But other colleges, other campuses might provide with environmental technology, oil or solid fuel. But it's up to the colleges that you go to. As I say, the one I teach at, that one we are doing natural gas. The following details, right? Basically, it's a little schedule. So, you cannot take an assessment until you've been registered. So this is part of the rules of City and Guilds. You cannot take any assessment until you're registered. Most colleges will get you registered ASAP. But for you to try and attempt some of these final assessments before the end of the year would be silly by that college. Questions would also be asked by City and Guilds if this did happen. Candidates must pass all assessments of each phase before entering the assessment for the next phase. So what it basically boils down to is you must complete everything at phase 1 to move on to phase 2. There are some little loopholes on this, but I'll explain that as we're going into it. But the key thing is you can't go on and can do the phase 2 assessments until you've finished everything on phase 1. All the content, the centres must ensure that the content is relevant and delivered before the candidates attempt the assessments and the exams. Now, the key difference with these qualification over the old MBQ qualification is the old MBQ qualification, you would finish a subject, e.g. you would do cold water, you would then do an exam. In this new qualification, there is only the one exam, and it is at the end of the year. So it covers everything that you've learned. This is why we've got to be careful on what you try and teach on to how much information you give. If you give a student way too much information or you focus on something that isn't relevant for that phase, you could cause your students to fail. Right, now when it comes to retakes and things like that, and again the old qual, you could keep retaking them until you passed. And I know there are some colleges out there where I've worked for them, and some of the tutors have had their students taking 4, 5 and 6 goes at passing an exam or an assignment. Now with this new qualification, that has gone, right? That is a definite no-no. You get 4 attempts. Okay, you only get 4 attempts at the exams, 4 attempts at the assessments. So what happens is, you as a candidate, or if you're a teacher, your candidates go in. If they fail that first attempt, they must resit it within the next 14 days of that retake, of that failure or referral. Okay, So before them 14 days are up, they've got to take their second go. If, however, that student then fails on that second go, he cannot, or they cannot, retake that until after 60 days. Now, how I run it at the other college, well, the college that I'm at the minute, is I got my students to take their exam beginning of June. If they failed, they retook it still in June. And if they failed a second time, which I did have 2 on my first go at this qualification that didn't pass it on the second go, they had the summer then to do self-study, and it covered my 60 days. So I didn't have to worry about it. But now this is where the little loopholes kick in. As a candidate, they can come back after the summer holidays if you are running it through the summer holidays. Again, the college I'm running it at, we're doing it at different stages. If they come back after the summer holidays and it's not quite past the 60 days, they can still start the phase 2 or phase 3, whichever one is next that they are working on. Okay, so they can continue until they pass or fail on their fourth go. So after that 60 days, you book them in again for the retake. Again, if they do not succeed after that third retake, they then have another retake again within 14 days. And if they are not successful after that fourth go, they have to go all the way back. So it's like snakes and ladders. You've hit the snake, you've got to go all the way back to the beginning of the phase that they've just failed at. Okay, so if they pass phase 1, but they get to phase 2 and they struggle and they fail on their fourth try of an assessment or an exam, they must go all the way back to phase 2. They don't have to go back to phase 1, they have completed phase 1. This is why City and Guilds is calling them phases, not years, because you could have students that might take 2 years to get past phase 2. It's the way that they've set it up. So again, you must redo the training. Job's done. Hopefully you are successful like the rest of my students were, and they all passed on their second or third go, and I didn't have to take any fourths, thank God. So there you go, just highlighting that key point there. So if the fourth attempt results in a fail, the candidate must repeat the training from the phase before taking the assessment again. One of the things I did discover with this, one of my students who failed on his second go, the employer that he was working for at that time decided that he did not want an apprentice who failed the phase 1's exams. So you could end up being made redundant after your fourth go because your employer may not think you have the correct qualities to be a plumber. So key thing here, all my students, after hearing that news that one of their colleagues has lost their job, have pulled their fingers out, and they are now taking this a lot more seriously. So I would advise, if you are a candidate or an apprentice that is working with someone, take this seriously. You only do have 4 attempts, okay? And if you're a tutor who's going to be teaching this, reiterate, and reinforce the fact that your students could lose their jobs if they fail on their fourth go. Now, when it comes to assessments, you've got your core phases. As I say, you've got phase 1, phase 2 and phase 3. So phase 1 is here, phase 2 is here, phase 3 is down here. At phase 1, you've got 3 assessment elements that we've got to complete. There is a health and safety exam. This exam can be taken after you've finished the training. This is the only exam where you can take this in the middle of the year. So once you finish health and safety training, whack them in, get the health and safety exam done and dusted. At the end of the year, as I say, in June, when I run it from September to June, June is when I book this exam in. This is the endpoint exam, and it's all online, multiple choice, but covering everything that's in phase 1. And then 0-12 is your practical assessments. Now, with phase 1, this is fairly simple when it comes to an apprenticeship skills. You've only got certain things to complete. And again, I'm going to be going through these in greater detail as I cover the phases. So we're looking at phase 1, so we will cover these. In phase 2, you've only got one exam and one set of assessments. Phase 3, one exam, one set of assessments, and you must complete your work logbook by the end of phase 3. If you do not complete the work logbook by the end of phase 3, you cannot go on to phase 4. That is what City and Guilds have said. So I put this in because this is what I give my students when they come in and come into my lessons. This is what I tell them they need for this course. So whenever they come into the classroom, I always tell them they've got to have pens, pencils, coloured pens or pencils. This is to aid their drawings because they're going to be doing a lot of drawings. They're going to be drawing heating system layouts and cold water, hot water systems. So it's good to have coloured pens or coloured pencils to aid identify the pipework. Later on, when we get into the further phases, you're also going to be using these for central heating. So you could be drawing a central heating system, or you could be drawing a wiring system. So it's good to have these different coloured pens or pencils. I personally prefer pencils because they don't go through the paper. Right, you'll also need a ruler, a non-scientific calculator, because you will be allowed to take a calculator into your exams, but it must be non-scientific or programmable, so you can do that. Notepad A4 preferably to go with your ring binder, and some folder separators. This is so you can start splitting them into their various subjects. So as I said, for an example, you're going to have a cold water, hot water, central heating. You don't want these notes mixing all the way up. So I got my students a load of separators in their ring binders, so they now have a cold water, a hot water and a central heating section. And as we complete a phase, they then add the next phase to that, because the notes that you've learned from phase 1 will carry over to phase 2 and may also reappear in that exam. So you've got to keep going back to the information. So you're building this revision notes up. Okay. Books that you definitely need for phase 1 is the City and Guilds Book 1. This will cover everything you need for phase 1 and halfway through phase 2. Water Regulations book is also a must-have. Now, you can get these books online on Amazon and places like that, but a lot of colleges, they have done a deal with most of these book companies and they can get them cheaper. But have a word with your tutor, or if you're the tutor, have a word with your shop or library and see if they can get them for a cheaper cost to the students. But these are two very important books that you need for phase 1. And I do say you need them, okay? Also, in the workshop, you will be expected to wear your PPE. So most of you, as an apprentice, will already have work boots supplied by your company, work trousers you may have brought, and the company may have provided you with overalls. When you come into my workshops, you've got to have these on. Always health and safety in the workshop. Now, phase 1. When you start your first phase, so this is going to be your first year maybe, or whichever way your college or campus is doing this course. As I say, in the college I'm working at, we've got one group that started in September. I've had another group now start in January, and I may have another one starting just after Easter. So we're staggering them so I can just keep track of who's where and control how many people are doing the assessments and the exams at a time. Now, if you are listening to this and you're in your college, it's something that you might need to think about, because you could have at times, because the way I've seen this is you're going to have 4 years. And if you've got groups rolling in every year, you could have phase 1 and phase 2, phase 3s going for exams at the same time. And then they could also be in the workshops. And if you haven't got a lot of workshop space, this could be a problem. So it's something you might need to think about. Now, in phase 1, all of health and safety is covered. So everything to do with health and safety is covered. Once you cover this, you will be doing your exam, or if you're a tutor, I recommend that you book them in for the exam. So it's going to be covering the basics of health and safety. A majority of it you would have already learnt with your companies that you were connected to, but it's something you're going to need to recover. Now, it's 8 sections. These are all important sections, and the exam is going to reflect on all 8 of these. So we're going to be looking, I will be doing lessons on these as we go through, but this is just your introduction to the course. So you've got plenty of time. You can pause now, have a read through these. We're going to be covering legislation, hazards, personal protective equipment, so PPE, accidents and incidents, how do you respond to them, electrical safety, safe working with heat producing equipment, safe access equipment. So we're going to be looking at ladders, scaffolding, and also we're going to be looking at confined spaces. And if you are working for a maintenance man, you may have to dig up some trenches to find some burst pipes. This is what you've got to be looking at for health and safety. Again, I will go through these in more details as I go through the lessons. Now, next one, the subject you'll be covering is common plumbing processes. Now, this ties in with that last end-on exam. So health and safety is its own separate unit. This now starts your foundations for your end-on exam. Now, common plumbing processes, again, you're going to cover everything there is to do with common. So you're going to be looking at can tools, power tools, pipes, fittings, how do you join them? All these kind of things are in there. Brackets and clippings. Now, again, I am going to be constructing some lessons on these various parts. They're only going to be short snippet bits, but it's something I'm working on for you. So if you are wanting some more information, I will go into these in a lot more detail in later videos. And also you're going to be looking at installing domestic plumbing and heating pipework. Now, scientific principles, you do not cover this all. As you can see already, you're going to be covering section 1, 2 and 5. The rest of scientific principles is covered in phase 2. So as a teacher, if you are doing this, please remember this. Don't just reel off the scientific principles from your year 2 stuff. Select the stuff that City and Guilds is asking for. If you go too mad, you will confuddle your students and you will end up with more failures. Just focus on what they've asked for. And it's fairly straightforward what they've asked for. Okay, so understanding units and measurements, properties of materials and mechanical principles is all they're going to be after. So we don't have to go mad on this one. It's a fairly short subject when it comes to scientific principles. Planning and supervision, this is all of this, but you will be covering these as we go into phase 2 and phase 3 in a lot more detail when they're attached to the relevant subject. So as we go into cold water, they'll be going into planning and supervision as well. It all ties in, as I've said. It all links in. But you're going to be covering all of planning and supervision, construction teams, informational sources, communication, how to communicate with others, who is responsible for what tasks, how to complete a risk assessment and produce a risk assessment document, and a work plan, a program. How are you going to do your first fixes? How are you going to do your second fixes? These are all covered in this planning and supervision as well. Then we go into the smaller parts. And again, for tutors out there who are watching this, remember, you're not doing all of cold water. You're not doing all of hot water. You are just doing a snippet. This is an introduction. Do not go mad, because again, you'll end up confusing your students. They won't get the information that they need. Just stick to what phase 1 requires. So cold water, understanding the cold water supply routes to a dwelling. So you're just sticking with the basics. And then installing the cold water system. We're talking the design, okay? So we're not going mad on this one. It is just the different designs for cold water systems. Same with hot water systems. We're just sticking with the basics. It is the designs of hot water systems. What you're going to need as a student is to be able to identify the various system designs by pictures or by a worded sentence. So it's nothing going to be too drastic. Then we have the last ones that we need to look at. And again, these are just your basics. Tutors out there, do not go mad. Do not try and cover all of level 2 central heating. You only need to do the designs of it. So you're just looking at basic designs for the central heating. But again, I'm going to construct some videos on these subjects for you. So if you do wish to use them or get information before doing your lessons, you can do. Then you've got rainwater. Again, we're just looking at the design side of it, the installing requirements and sanitation. That would be phase 1 complete. All right, so now we're going to be looking at what you have to do at the end. So as I said before, in phase 1 you've got 3 sets of assessments or exams that you need to complete. Health and safety, you should complete that soon after you've completed the health and safety subject. Get them booked in, get the exam done, job's done. That's one less for them to worry about at the end of the year. Then you've got the end on phase 1 exam and the assessments. Now, the health and safety exam, it's got 20 questions. It is over 30 minutes in duration, and the pass mark, they say in here, approximately 60%. The reason they say approximately is this can go up or down depending on the students in other colleges. If there is a load of students failing, City and Guilds have been known to reduce it, but it's very rare that happens, but they have been known to increase the pass mark. So if everybody is passing it, you might find that your group, everybody else has passed it with 70% pass marks. Your group then will go in and the City and Guilds will adjust it and say 65% is the pass mark, and they adjust it to suit. Now you can see there as well that each one of the 8 subjects that we've been covering will have a certain number of questions relating to that subject. So if I just take the example here, no health and safety legislation that applies to the building service industry, you're going to have 2 questions on that. Okay, 2 basic questions to do with that one. 4 on 2, 2, 2 and 2, and then you're going to have another 4 which is working safe with heat producing equipment. So you'll have 4 questions on that, and then the rest of them are 2s. Nice and straightforward. It helps you with your revision as well, and it gives you some guidance. Again, I will give you some revision hints in videos later on. When it comes to the endpoint exam, as you can see here, a little bit longer on the time. You get 60 minutes, again, approximately 60% pass mark. You're allowed your non-programmable calculator. A pen or pencil is allowed, but no reference material. These questions are going to be based on what you can remember. And as you can see here, common plumbing processes, scientific principles, planning and supervision, cold water, hot water, central heating, rainwater and sanitation. They're all in there. 40 questions are the total amount of questions you're going to be asked. And again, that 40 is spread over the subjects. So if we take common plumbing processes, you're going to have 6, 10, 12, 13 questions on plumbing processes. What we got here, 9 on scientific principles, 4 on planning, 5 on cold water, 3 on hot water, 3 on central heating, 1 on rainwater and 2 on sanitation. Now this is why I'm saying to your teachers that if you're listening to this, don't go mad. They don't need that much information. Just stick to what phase 1 requires. And again, if you do with that, stick with them requirements, you will do well in the exams. Again, I will help with a little study video for this later on. When it comes to the assessments, you only have 5 to do. During the year, you will have a workbook which is available on the City and Guilds Smart Screen facility. There is a workbook for your tutors, or if you are the tutor, to download, which your students will work through throughout the year to get them ready for these assessments. It is not like the old systems, okay? Please bear this in mind. You cannot take these assessments until the end of the subject. you get the students to work through the workbook. Once the workbook is complete, then you can get them ready for the assessments and then get them sorted. Now, you've got applying personal protective measurements. This is a health and safety one. It's a fairly short one, so it could be along the lines of lifting, using correct lifting practices or lifting equipments, applying electrical safety. So temporary continuity bonds, safe isolation may be required, and safe use of access equipment. So you may be asking your students to go up and down ladders to complete tasks. Then on the common plumbing processes, using of hand tools, you're going to be asked to build some various frames or designs of systems. Now, again, for the tutors, these assessments are not like the ones that we used to do for level 2 or level 3. They are just 2 basic frames setups, but they're a lot harder to work on and a lot bigger than what we used to. If you complete the workbooks that are provided by Sitting Guilds, your students should be well prepared for these end-on assessments. The other thing that you've got to bear in mind when it comes to these assessments, in the Sitting Guilds handbook, it states there, the person who trained the students in practical and theory cannot be the person who does the assessments. It should be an independent teacher for these assessments. But there are, again, Sitting Guilds does say there are some leeways if you haven't got that spare facilities. In the college that I'm working at, we do have the spare facility because there are 2 of us doing these teaching, so we swap our groups. So I will assess their group and they will assess my group. That way it is fair and even, and Sitting Guilds, we hit all the criteria that Sitting Guilds require. Now, one of the things that your students should be working on as well in this first phase is their work logbook. Your work-based learning team or your on-site assessors should be getting these students to complete as many of these assessments and their workbook as possible. Now, ideally, I think we worked it out in the college that I'm at, they should be completing 3 of these site visits a year for the first 3 years. That way they will have completed their book correctly. The assessor would have had everything completed. The student would have completed the extra bits that they would have had to do, because like the old workbook, there are bits that must be seen by the assessor. There are other bits that must be seen by the student, witness or employer to say that they completed these tasks. It isn't a small book. This is quite a big book, and I do recommend as a student or as the teachers, get started on this as soon as possible. You don't want to get to phase 2 and have 6 assessments needed, because your assessor or work-based learning person has got all the other guys to be doing as well. So that 6, depending on the size of the group, can quadruple rapidly for that assessor. So you stand very little chance of getting your 6 in. So get the workbook off them, get looking at it, complete some stuff if you can, and get them out for their health and safety in your first phase. Try and get the health and safety completed in phase 1. Then that leaves you the other bits for phase 2 and 3. Because remember, you cannot go to phase 4 until you've completed this workbook. Because phase 4 is all about your extra one. So in my college, we are doing gas. So you're going to get a whole new work logbook for gas. So you can't be working on 2 logbooks at the same time. You've got to have that plumbing done, and then you can focus on the gas. Okay? So, in summary, at the end of every phase, you have a test and assessment. All right? You'll notice I put their phase or year, because your tutors or teachers will still call them years, but Sitting Guilds call them phases because you might not have them set to a year. And if a student or someone yourselves fail your 4th go, you will go back to the beginning. So it's a phase. You need to pass everything to move to the next phase. After you complete the 4 years though, remember you're still not finished. You have the endpoint assessment to complete. Now the endpoint assessment is a completely independent assessor. This is an assessor supplied by City and Guilds. It's no one from your college or place of where you've learnt. It is an assessor that is supplied from City and Guilds. They are completely independent. It's kind of like those of you that are out working there, you might be working with someone who's gas qualified. They would have talked about doing their ACSs. And basically that just proves that you are competent to be a gas engineer. And it's the same process for this. You will have a completely independent one. This could take you 6 months. And when I say takes you 6 months, it doesn't mean that the assessment will take you 3 months. It could take 6 months to get you booked in for the endpoint assessment. And if you fail that, the same rules apply as before. That you will have first go, then you'll have another go within 14 days if they can get you in. If you fail that, you'll have another go after 60 days. So already now you could be going closer to a year for these endpoint assessments. So if you put it into terms, if you don't take this seriously, you could maybe be doing this for 5 years before you become a fully qualified plumbing engineer. Okay, so bear this in mind. And then once you pass, you then become a fully qualified plumber. You'll also have your water regulations, your unvented, and if you're doing your gas, you'll have your gas safe. If you're doing HETAS, you'll have your HETAS. So if you're doing solid fuels, if you're doing oil, you'll have your OFTEC. So you will come out after these 4 and a bit years, hopefully, fully qualified, ready to work. Your companies should give you a full pay rise because now you will be a fully qualified competent engineer. But please do remember though, yes, you may be qualified, but it may take you a further another year to become fully independent because you're still learning, you're still covering stuff, and you might not feel comfortable working on your own straight away. So be careful, don't rush it, never be afraid to ask for help and never be afraid to ask questions. Right, so that is the end of the introduction of phase 1. I hope you did enjoy this. If you did find this relevant and enjoyable, please remember to hit that like button. And if you haven't done so already, why not help support this channel and hit the subscribe button. And if you hit the little bell on the side, you will be notified whenever I put new videos on, which I am going to be trying to do at least a video a week for the subjects and also covering the phases. So the next video is going to be what is in phase 2. So thank you very much for listening. I will see you all in the next video. But thank you very much for listening and bye bye.